Greetings, gentlemen. I have a question today, and that is the topic of the video. And this is something I've been wondering about and sort of just entertaining myself with for a little while now. And that is from a self-aware perspective, from a red-pilled man's perspective. What is the best realistic scenario for dating as a man today? For those men that still want to date, or for those guys that are totally done with dating, assuming someone basically pointed a gun to your head and threatened you and said, you will date a woman. You're basically forced to do it. For those men, what is truly attainable after rejecting the conventional dynamic of marriage and children? You've already basically decided that the MGTOW point of view is more or less correct, and you've rejected the idea of having kids, trying to have a family, or living with a woman, or getting married. You've rejected those ideas. What is left? What is the best case realistic scenario if you were going to date as a man today in Western culture? So after we distill all the unrealistic expectations, right? We know we're not going to build a life with a woman. We know that women are not sugar and spice and everything nice. We know that a lot of the relationships today, the vast majority of them, in my opinion, are heavily one-sided in favor of women. When you realize these kinds of things, you distill all the sort of nonsense that society tries to tell men to believe in. There does seem, in my opinion, to be some potential remaining for men to date women. There seems to be some certain level of value, potentially, for men who date, but that value is pretty limited because of the environment, because of the culture, the legal system, and everything else. And that's what I want to talk about here, is why I tend to think this way. It's not necessarily that there's nothing positive that's possible, even realistically today, in dating a woman. It's that it just really isn't that fantastic. And the way that I consider it, I may have men that disagree with me one way or the other on this. Right? There are going to be guys that say there's nothing positive whatsoever in dating women today, Dan. Or there may be guys that say, well, you could find the right woman and settle down with her. What I'm basically going to suggest is that, in my opinion, the truth is somewhere in between those two ideas, right? It's possible that essentially you're at the right place at the right time, and you meet a woman that's part of the maybe 10 to 15% of women that are still actually dateable. And you could argue again that the percentage is lower than that. That's not really what's important here as far as I'm concerned. But maybe you meet a woman that you have some things in common with. She claims that she doesn't want to have kids either, right? She's not wanting to get married necessarily. And again, the vast majority of women are not going to fit into those criteria. But let's just say that you get along, you actually decide to go out with her, things are good for a while, you enjoy the experience, you have sex with her basically, and you enjoy that experience, and she does too, and you decide to have some form of short-term relationship / dating experience, right? I don't think that's impossible. That's difficult to attain. I'm going to get to that in a little while. But it's actually possible to do that still. The issue is, what do you actually accomplish with that? I mean, it's nice to have, and this is what's been foremost on my mind with this issue when I think about it, is that it's nice to have in theory. It's nice to have that potential. It's not an F-buddy thing that I'm describing, but it's kind of like one or two steps up from that, right? This is someone that you like. This is someone that you get along with, at least initially, at least for a while. You seem to have common interests, or maybe you really do. And she's not a feminist, and she's not trying to make you get married either. You just basically have an experience with her that lasts for as long as it lasts. I don't think there's anything necessarily negative about that, unless when you do break up with her, she breaks up with you, she does try to make false accusations against you about the whole history that you had together, and that's possible. But let's just assume that that doesn't happen, right? What is the best case scenario with that at the end of the day? Well, the best case scenario is that it doesn't really add anything essential to your life. Right? You're not really building a life with her or attempting to do that because again, if you're basically self-aware in that sense as a guy today, you know that that's not really feasible because that would mean getting married and having kids, and most likely having kids, not necessarily, but it would mean trying to plan your life with someone that could pull the rug out from under you and take half of your stuff basically anytime she wants. So if you're rejecting that outright because you know that it's not healthy to put yourself in that situation, what you have left is what I've basically described. A relationship or a dating experience that's nice for as long as it lasts, and then it's not going to last anymore beyond a certain period of time, right? It's nice to have that positive representation of female companionship, but such examples of this are pretty rare in practice, rare to even get to the point of achieving what I've already described, of getting to a point where you have something going with a woman that's not a complete bitch, that's not trying to use sex against you, that's not pretending to be interested in what you're interested in so that she can get you to sign some sort of contract with the state with her, basically. Very few women, percentage-wise, are willing to even be a part of this type of relationship that I've described. So these sort of examples are rare in practice. They usually require a disproportionate amount of effort on the man's part to attain, right? In other words, you as the man are still expected to ask the woman out, and you as the man are still expected to pay for dates in many cases. That kind of thing is not really very convenient to begin with for a guy. And this sort of arrangement usually only lasts for a period of time, a limited period of time. And so what do you have left? Well, you have an arrangement that lasts for maybe at best a few years. Maybe some guys can do better than that, right? Maybe the woman is satisfied with not having kids and not getting married and not living with you and still calling you her boyfriend and still going out with you and still being pleasant to deal with. Maybe she'll do that for a period of several years, but it's very unlikely and very rare. The best case realistic scenario, in my opinion, and again, I expect that guys are going to criticize me either way on this in terms of, well, no, I think you can still find the right partner to build a life with, which I think is nonsense. But then on the other end, oh, I don't even think this is possible. Dan, you're probably being very charitable with what's realistic here, and maybe I am, but I think that it is possible to have a positive connection with a woman that lasts for a little while until it's over. And that's basically what you have left. And the point of this whole thought process, for me at least, is okay, you have something that works for a few years at best, and then eventually she decides that her hypergamy is kicking in. She's not going to consciously think of this, obviously, but she basically decides that she wants kids after all. Or she decides that she wants you to commit to her because she's tired of not having a husband or not having someone that she can essentially clamp down on and basically be her provider and protector. Eventually, those sort of instincts are very, very likely to kick in, even with a woman that's not, quote, like that in the beginning, and may not be like that for a period of even a few years, several months to a few years. Eventually, it's very likely that she will be like that. Eventually, she's going to want something more out of you, or she's going to compare you to other men and think that she can do better, or she's going to want you to marry her and have kids with her and settle down, so to speak, and make that commitment. Unfortunately, at that point, if you're, again, a red pill guy, or you're aware of this, whether you're red pill or MGTOW, however you want to describe yourself, eventually this is probably going to happen and you're going to have to break up. That's just the realistic end of this. Eventually, you're not going to be on the same page with that woman. And because women don't need men and men don't need women, the system we have is basically completely screwed up. There's no reason to say, well, we'll just get through it. I'll compromise as a guy. There's no reason to do that. Not maybe on the small things you can compromise a little bit, but in terms of how you're actually trying to live your life, we know that it doesn't make sense to sort of forego that to try to make the woman happy, because then you're trending toward a conventional, dysfunctional, anti-male relationship, right? Where you as the guy are giving so much more than what she is. And that's another possibility. She could end up basically just not putting anything into the relationship anymore, whereas you care about her and you're trying to, and this assumes that you care about the woman, right? You actually are trying to have a healthy relationship with her, even though you're not going to commit or have children. Eventually, she's probably just going to get bored of that. If nothing else, she's just going to put less and less effort into trying to get you to be with her, because she's not going to get anything else out of it. And a lot of women, again, going back to Prefolt's law and hypergamy and trying to find the bigger, better deal, eventually it's just not going to be worthwhile. And so, in my opinion, guys, the sort of point that this leads to is that what remains of dating likely isn't worth any large degree of effort to pursue from the guy's perspective. Even though not every woman is a horrible partner, as a result of all this, the juice is just likely not worth the squeeze with what remains of the dating scene, right? And we hear this statement, this phrase that the juice isn't worth the squeeze a lot of the time in the manosphere. And to me, that's what a lot of dating and modern day relationships come down to, even if they're not conventional relationships that would lead to marriage or having kids. Even if it is just a situation of, hey, I'm not going to make this sort of investment as the man. It's just going to be a thing where we both benefit from being with one another. We enjoy spending our time together. We enjoy the sexual and the non-sexual aspects of all of it. Eventually, it's still going to be a situation of the juice is not worth the squeeze in the long run, I think. So for a red-pilled man who has already rejected marriage, children, and cohabitating with a woman, what remains possible for dating isn't really all that impressive, in my opinion, guys. The more I think about it, it's not a matter of there's nothing positive ever that can go on between a man and a woman now. It's just that what's left is not particularly impressive today. The best case scenario can be nice from the guy's perspective if all goes almost perfectly well. It's realistic, I guess, to say that you can have a relationship that lasts for as long as it lasts, maybe up to a few years. It's nice to think that that's possible, and I think it is in some cases, but the best case scenario, even though that's nice, is certainly not essential for a man to live his best life, for a man to experience becoming the best version of himself by improving the things that he does, by basically focusing on what's important to him. A woman is just sort of like an accoutrement or a potential benefit for a period of time until that benefit is over, because either she's not doing anything in the relationship anymore, or she monkey branches, or she's just a bitch to deal with after a certain point. I mean, I'm not trying to basically say that everything is negative, because I don't think that's necessarily true, but the positive or healthy aspects, the potential benefits of having some form of dating / short-term relationship with a woman, the value and the benefits of that are quite limited. And it's to the degree that you can easily live without it. There's nothing impressive or special about trying to have a relationship with a woman now. And this is the way I view it for myself. I'm not going to say that I'll never have a girlfriend again. But if it happens, it happens. And if it doesn't, which there's a pretty good chance that I won't have a girlfriend in the future as well, that's fine too. I'm not missing out on anything. There's nothing that I'm failing to do that is essential in my life based on the dating / relationship game as it is today, because I realize that, again, marriage, cohabitating, having kids, that's not a healthy position for me to put myself in. And what's left over, although a lot of it's negative, the good things that are still potentially there are not really worth putting a lot of effort into. They're not worth any sort of concerted level of energy that I would try to put into dating or relationships. It's just not worth it. If it's something that is nice and enjoyable for the time being and for the short term, that's great. But I don't count on it lasting, because there's nothing that encourages women to be loyal in relationships. There's nothing that encourages women to actually do things for the men that they're in relationships with now. And so I realized that what's left over is just really not particularly impressive. And a lot of it is just more trouble than it's worth. Even though there's still a chance that you could have something positive as an outcome to all of this, eventually it's going to end, and eventually you're going to move on anyway. And that, to me, is the conclusion that I've sort of reached by thinking about this for a period of time, is that, yeah, it could be nice to date a woman. It could be nice to have a girlfriend, but there's really not that much value there. And especially, again, it's really important to emphasize not getting the woman pregnant, not putting yourself in a position to have accusations made against you, right? There are all these risks and liabilities, but even if things go well, what is that really worth to you in the end from the guy's perspective? It's worth maybe something if you enjoyed your time with this person and if she treated you reasonably well for a period of time, but it's definitely not something worth living for in itself. It's not something that you can't miss out on. It's not something that is essential to live your best life as a man, and you do have the risk of all these negative things happening as well. So I really am just not that impressed with it. I don't feel like all women are necessarily horrible partners by the nature of who they are. Most of them are. Most of them are not going to be good girlfriends. Most of them are not going to be reliable. Most of them are not going to be someone that you can count on. But even for the ones that could potentially be a decent girlfriend, there's just not a whole lot of value there. It's not anything that is essential. It's not anything that is worth putting any sort of real serious amount of effort at all into. And to me, that's the conclusion to all this, is that the best case scenario for dating as a man today, given how things actually are, not the message that we're given from society and from women, but the actual best case scenario is really nothing that you can't live without, and it's really nothing worth pursuing that much. In most of these scenarios, the juice really isn't worth the squeeze, even for short-term relationships. And if you can find a girl to have a dating experience and you want that as a guy, and you're aware of the risks and you can get something positive out of that, that's great. But to a large extent, it's just not worth the effort. And in most cases, even if you can have something that's good for a while, it's eventually going to end. And so the value of it is pretty limited.